Stop Hazara Genocide event. We are very glad to have you all joining us tonight. My name is Dua and I am the Vice President of the UTS Students for Humanity Society. And I'll be hosting this event alongside Naz from Our Race. Collectively, we would like to thank you all for taking the time out to listen, learn, and contribute to this important conversation. We hope that we all come away from this event having learned something new, or at least heard something that stimulates interest and reflection.
Thank you, Dua. Hi, everyone. Like Dua said, my name is Sharifi. I'm a Hazara ethnic from Afghanistan, and I'm also a volunteer and a team member here at Our Race. Before we begin tonight's program, I'd like to acknowledge the land that we all are on, our unceded Aboriginal land. I'm calling in from the beautiful lands of the Darug people of the Eora Nation. And as a Hazara, I understand very, very close to my heart how important land, how important sovereignty is to people, to community, and to heritage. And it's important for us to centre the voices of our First Nations people as we continue to advocate for Afghanistan, for human rights, and for the causes that are true to our hearts. We need to ensure that First Nations voices are at the forefront of our advocacy for human rights. But like Dua said, we're very thankful for everyone being here today. It's really important that we continue the conversation on Afghanistan. Some housekeeping rules: please make sure that you are on mute during the duration of the panel discussion so we can hear the speakers properly. Have your camera on if you're comfortable, but I understand that if you're not, that's totally okay as well. We will have 15 minutes at the end where you can ask your questions. Please feel free to put the questions in the chat while the speakers are speaking, and we will get to them at the end. We also have a donation link which Doug will put in the chat. Alongside Siasra Refugee Learning Centre, we have set up the fundraiser to support the journalism on the ground. The money raised will aid journalists and individuals in Afghanistan by supporting the provision of mobile phones, small audio recorders, travel and food expenses to facilitate the documentation of current events. As you know, Afghanistan has been going through a lot lately, but most importantly, one of the main factors that has been keeping Afghanistan at the forefront of our advocacy has been the people on the ground and the work that the documentation that they've been sending us. Unfortunately, the Taliban have attacked free media. They've stopped journalists from recording, they've stopped journalists from getting news out into the world. So this is vital work that we need to continue doing for the people of Afghanistan. So please consider donating. No amount is too little. The journalists in Afghanistan need every bit of our help. The link will be posted in the chat, but also you can find the link in our Instagram and our Facebook bios. And now I'd like to introduce Doug to give us an introduction as to what Our Race is and what the work that we do.
Thank you, Naz and Dua, and thank you to all the panelists for volunteering their time for this important and timely conversation. And also thank you to everyone joining us today. So first, before I go any further, I would also like, all of us, the majority of us here today are settlers on this land, whether it be recent or for a longer period of time. So I think it's good for us to take a moment to think about which land we were on. So I know people are putting that in the chat, so that's a great starting point. And I think it's really important when we're talking about tonight, as Naz had said, that we're talking about stopping Hazara genocide. And here we sit on stolen land, where the impacts of genocide and colonization still continue today. So therefore, it's most important for us to recognise that we are all standing on stolen Aboriginal land. I'm on the land of the Bidjigal people, and I'd like to pay my respect to elders past and present for their custodianship of the lands, seas and skies on which I am an uninvited guest, living, working and benefiting from. I would also like to extend my respect to all First Nations people joining us here today. I don't want to speak too much about Our Race because it's not about Our Race, this event. But what I will do is we'll drop some links in there so you can find a bit more about the ethical storytelling approach that we do at Our Race. What I would like to say though is what has been our role in this event. And our role has been to give up the space and provide a platform to the voices who have been quite often deliberately silenced and or minimized. For too long, we hear this phrase, I am speaking on behalf of the voiceless, as if to say the people with lived experience do not have agency. This is so not true. We need to change this mindset. We need to decenter ourselves. And this means by listening and learning to take the invitation to not be at the center. This means using our skills, but most importantly, our access to spaces, to people, for the so-called voiceless, to use their voice without us directing, curating, editing, and or minimizing their stories, ideas, and expertise. We must ask who are the story holders and who should be the storytellers. For too long, we have walked in front of the people with a lived experience as if we are the experts. For too long, we've taken up the role as the white savior to profit from trauma and win awards doing it. This is not being an ally or an accomplice. We shouldn't need to be at the center as the hero. You know, it is being the hero that we're seeing right now being played out in Hollywood movies about Afghanistan. But whose story is going to be told and for whose benefit? And these are the questions we are trying to answer tonight. And this is how we put the event together. So rather than just people sharing their stories, we've done this in a way where the people with the lived experience, we value them as the highest level of expertise in the design, the delivery, and also the call to action. So that's what we'd like to see. So tonight, on behalf of the Our Race team, welcome. I hope you enjoyed this educational event, and I hope it inspires you to take action in a way that causes you a little bit of discomfort beyond tonight, because that's where change will really happen. So enjoy, and I'm looking forward to the conversation tonight.
Thank you, Doug. I would also like to introduce Students for Humanity. So we are a student organised society from the University of Technology, Sydney, that is situated on the land of the Eora Nation. We are passionate about investigating, learning, and voicing human rights concerns and social political issues around the world. And as Doug said, our main objective in all that we do is not to speak over others, because no one is voiceless, but rather pass on the mic in recognition of inclusive representation and the autonomy of the people concerned. So in tonight's event, we will be discussing the current political situation in Afghanistan and hearing from three brilliant speakers who will contribute their own knowledge and experience to the conversation. We will be touching on the impact that the Taliban regime has had on particularly women, the implications on the Hazara ethnic group in Afghanistan and in the diaspora, as well as the suppression of independent journalism in Afghanistan. Each speaker will provide a varied call of action for Afghanistan, and we encourage you all to check out the links that will be provided throughout this event in the chat.
I'd like to now just give a very brief overview of the state of affairs in Afghanistan and the historical roots, especially of the Hazara genocide. As you know, it's almost been 3 months since Afghanistan fell to the hands of the Taliban. However, the historical persecution of the Hazaras have been a long-rooted history in Afghanistan. Hazaras have been an ethnic minority, but because of their Shia identity, they are also persecuted based on that. Hazaras have lost a critical mass of their population since the 1880s, when King Abdul Rahman Khan effectively took a mandate of genocide, killing, destabilizing, and taking others as slaves of almost 60% of the Hazara region. This genocide also included the takeover of the central Afghan lands which belonged to the Hazara people, known as Hazarajat. Following the 1880s, the persecutions were continued by the following kings, and unfortunately, even when Afghanistan became a democracy, the persecution and the genocide did not end. However, because of the Taliban takeover on the 15th of August, the situation for the Hazaras have become incredibly volatile because of the Taliban's long-winded agenda against the Hazaras. the Hazaras not only are targeted because of being ethnic minorities, but their Shia identity placed them at the forefront of being persecuted. The Shia identity has been politicized, securitized, and as a result, the Taliban and religious extremists, have had in order to incredibly destabilize the region, have ensured that the Hazaras do not have a stake in their own identity. There has been an incredible push towards a Pashtunization process, ensuring that all members of parliament, the Taliban parliament and Senate, are from one ethnic minority. Today I found out that the Taliban had released their names for their Senate or their parliament. Not a single woman, not a single person from ethnic minorities or religious minorities for that, and they all were middle-aged men. And now if that doesn't make the hair on the back of your neck crawl, I don't know what does. As a Hazara myself, as a woman, that the last 20 years of progress came down to one moment in history, and everything came crumbling down. But as a young person, there is still hope. I still have a deep-seated hope in my heart that Afghanistan will be free again. Hazaras in particular will be able to be themselves, celebrate their culture and heritage in freedom and in prosperity.
Thank you, Naz. I would like to introduce our speakers tonight for this panel. And first up, we are joined by Farkhunda Akbari. Farkhunda, if you want to give a small wave to everyone. Thank you. So Farkhunda is a PhD candidate at the Australian National University. Her research follows diplomatic actors and peace settlements with non-state armed actors, looking at cases in Afghanistan and in Cambodia. She has obtained a bachelor's and master's degree in international relations from La Trobe and the University of Melbourne, as well as an advanced master's in diplomacy from the Australian National University. Farkhunda has worked at Afghanistan's Independent Directorate of Local Governance, the United Nations headquarters, and Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission. Welcome, Farkhunda.
Thank you.
Thank you. We are also joined by Muzaffar Ali. Muzaffar is a former refugee from Afghanistan. He is currently living in Adelaide and studies at the University of South Australia. He worked for 7 years for the United Nations in Afghanistan. His work has also involved the disarmament of illegal armed groups, strengthening political institutions and civil society organizations and development. In the wake of the worsening security issue in Afghanistan, Muzaffar has decided to migrate to Indonesia in 2013, where he played a key role to establish the first ever refugee school in Indonesia. He regularly organizes awareness campaigns for Australians and fundraising events for school in Indonesia. Thank you, Muzaffar, for joining us.
Thank you.
We are also joined by Sajjad Askary. Sajjad is a contributor for The Guardian Australia and the Deputy Chair of Australia, New Zealand and the Pacific Working Group at Pacific Refugee Rights Network. He has a doctorate as well as a Bachelor of Arts in International Relations and a Juris Doctor student at Monash Law School. Sajjad is a public speaker, storyteller, human rights and refugee advocate, and panel moderator with national and global work experience in human rights and refugee issues. He has worked with leading NGOs throughout Australia, such as Kaldor Centre for International Refugee Law, Human Rights Watch Australia, Asylum Seeker Resource Centre, and Refugee Council of Australia. Thank you and welcome to all our speakers. It's a great pleasure to have you here with us today. So I would like to move on to the questions and the discussion for this panel. And my first question is to Farkhunda. So over the past few months, the news has been saturated with current events that are unfolding in Afghanistan and the Taliban's claim to power and control. And in many media publications, we have heard the Taliban spokesman try to reassure people of their reformation and their particular concern in advancing Afghan women. So Farkhunda, could you please recount to us the current situation in Afghanistan, with a focus particularly on the multifaceted impact this has had on women from a human rights and civil perspective? And could you please analyse the living reality in Afghanistan and how Hazaras, and particularly women, have fared under Taliban rule, not only now, but in the past and contrast that to what is being said?
Thank you, Dua, for the introduction and for the question. But let me also thank Doug, Naz, our race and UTS Student for Humanity for organizing tonight's event. I will probably answer your question in segments, in a few segments. First, to give you a reflection about the current situation, what are we facing, the Taliban rule and their governance, vulnerability of women, your question or your point on the Hazaras and what we can do. On the current situation or the realities that Afghanistan is facing today, it's a man-made catastrophe. It's just a few days ago, the head of WFP said it is probably the worst humanitarian catastrophe we are facing in the 21st century in our current time. Some 22 million people are facing starvation, and by the end of the winter, which is starting in a month time and ending in next 3 to 4 months, we are about 95% of the population in Afghanistan is facing hunger. So the war, the cycle of violence in Afghanistan have taken a different shape. And here, even if they're not dying from bullets, from suicide bombings, from airstrikes, they're dying from hunger. Each one of us on this panel from Afghanistan, we have our family. We do here on daily basis updates. My mom sitting right across me in the living room, she receives phone calls from her relative that it is bad. If we don't help them from here, or they are going to suffer so much. And this is striking. What I meant by being all of this scenario and situation is man-made, is all, we are all responsible as an international community. The way in which the withdrawal was, the unconditional withdrawal of international forces from Afghanistan was decided, and the US and eventually everyone else followed suit because they were relying on intelligence, on the military capacity and everything else of the US in Afghanistan to remain or leave. So, I mean, they joined in 2001 following the US, and then they left once Biden announced in April that he's going to pull out all troops. All of this was predictable, that pulling out troops from Afghanistan under these circumstances unconditionally to what the Taliban had promised but never met their commitments would lead to this current situation that we are in today. The situation is so bad, it's so big, it's massive that I always fail to encapsulate it in words and tell people about it, because who do I talk to you about? Women issues, the Hazara genocide, the country's falling apart, 95% of the countries facing starvation. All of this is happening under our watch. And it's sad to see that everything is reduced to how do we help people only who are responsible or helped the international community directly, especially from the Australia's case, who was interpreters, who were families here. The one family member is here, let's say first family, like the father or the husband is here, and the remaining family in Afghanistan. Even that we don't get enough, but everything about Afghanistan is reduced to those very small things. But let me tell you, the mess, the catastrophe in Afghanistan that we're witnessing today, everybody is responsible. That 44 nations that were involved, that got involved in Afghanistan in December 2001, they're responsible. It is not just the Afghans. I mean, we have to accept the blame and also self-reflect that the Afghan leadership failed the people, but here it was the international community. And I grieve every time that I hear the word that it was a state building and a nation building project in Afghanistan that had failed, as if just any other project have failed. No, it was not just a project. It was when the international community entered Afghanistan, it brought hope. It brought promises to some 38, 39 million people, women, ethnic minorities, like the Hazaras, who were always persecuted throughout the history, were told that we are here, we are going to protect, and also that values that were invested on democracy, human rights, women's rights, people gave their heart and soul to those words. I traveled to Afghanistan. I went to not just urban areas, but I traveled deep down in rural Afghanistan. I saw people believing in those promises. I don't know how they feel right now in August 2021 or in April when Biden decided to pull out troops from Afghanistan and abandoning an entire nation. I do understand the criticism that we face or the situation Afghanistan face about the fact that we cannot stay in Afghanistan forever, but the way in which the situation in the political, in the diplomatic level in Afghanistan was handled, it was the international community, Australia included, because Australia only followed the footprints of the US and it did not take its own moral decision about, or ethical decision about what's going to happen to Afghanistan. We saw the desperate scene, young people flying off from the plane on 15th, 16th, 17th of August in Kabul airport. There were young people, they are desperate, they want to get out because they know what was ahead of them. And now here we are talking about this catastrophe. You asked me about women's situation. What do I tell you? Everybody knows. I mean, the Taliban are known for the gender apartheid. They're known for their discriminatory policies against women. They're known for their massacres, for their persecution of the Hazara people. And nothing has changed because we were following the world, the intelligence of every country present in Afghanistan are following that. They were desperate to see some changes in the Taliban behavior to sell it out that no, the Taliban have changed. Here we are leaving the situation or the country that we invested on. Our tax was paid for those projects in a better situation 20 years later. We know those things did not were not on the place that we wish to be, but we still decided to close the eyes, withdraw troops, and also shift attention. And the only thing that the international community is finding solace or giving. Trying to say that we did something humane is, oh, we evacuated this and that percentage, but there are 38 million people. And I personally know many women, young people from the civil society who are in nobody's evacuation list. They're stuck in Afghanistan. I mean, we all love our country. They love their country. They want to be in Afghanistan. It's their goal. It's their vision. It's their mission to work there. But that support that was promised is taken away from them in such a brutal way, such an irresponsible way. Afghanistan has always sort of stuck out as an old state, a very brutal, extreme example of whatever in international politics was happening. But what we saw in the last 3 months is something that we all have to be ashamed of it, that how we let that happen under our eyes. Who would think in the year 2021, these girls behind me, they're secondary school students in my home province that another speaker from this event, Muzaffar Ali, took photo. They cannot go to school. secondary schools, 12-year-old, 13-year-old. They cannot go to classrooms. Why? Because they are girls. And this is a country that some $2 trillion was spent on. The Taliban did not come and win from the air. We allowed it. It was allowed, and the decisions that were made, especially on the so-called peace process from 2018 onward, made this or conditioned the situation that we are in today, or Afghanistan is in today, to happen. I mean, the scope of the event does not allow me to talk more about that collapse in more technical aspects of it, and then the peace process, but I'm very happy to talk to you about it in the Q&A. I hope I'm not running out of time, but let me touch briefly on the name of tonight's event, Stop Hazara Genocide. It's a hashtag that was organically, it trended in several countries some few months ago, just before the Taliban took over in Europe, in Australia, in neighboring countries, including in Afghanistan. This was a desperate call from the Hazaras that the situation of the Hazaras in particular are very vulnerable in Afghanistan, and we are facing an attempt of genocide. All signs are there that there is an intention for the destruction of the Hazara identity, at least in part, if not in whole. This is done by deliberately killing members of the Hazara community and causing serious physical and mental harm to members of the community in whole or in part. This is exactly fitting that genocide definition. The history, as Naz talked about, and my friends Sajjad and Muzaffar might flesh out more in their talks, but here we are looking at persecution that happened under different Afghan regimes and the last 20 years, and then the last 3-4 years especially, the Hazaras were particularly targeted. I mean, we have not seen anywhere in the world where women who are delivering babies in maternity hospitals were targeted, and this was done in May last year in Dasht-e Barchi, that killed 23 mothers and 2 babies who were just about to deliver baby or had already delivered their babies. And then there are other examples, such as the school bombings that kill 100 people, and sports centers, gyms that target were mostly to the young generation of the Hazaras, who had used the opportunity in the last 20 years to come together, to reclaim their identity and be recognized, or struggle for their recognition of equality under the democratic institutions in Afghanistan. I mean, we were for the first time recognized as an equal citizen in Afghanistan under the 2004 constitution. But we did face systematic discrimination as an ethnic group, being different religiously and ethnically in Afghanistan. And there has been that slow burning of genocide. There was discrimination wherever you go. There was targeted killings under that. But now that the Taliban have taken over as an extremist Sunni organization, and that the massacre that the Taliban have committed themselves in Afghanistan during their first regime, let's say the 1998 Mazar massacre. My family was in Mazar in 1998. They left everything to flee over a night. And that massacre killed between 8,000 to 12,000 people within the scope of 3 days. And now that this same group is back to power, and they don't want to recognize anything about the Hazaras, not their religion, not their presence, their identity. I think today they just want to breathe. They just want to be alive and breathe, and that's a good news that, okay, well, whoever you are, in whichever part of the country, if you're a Hazara and you're breathing, under the Taliban regime, yes, the Taliban are okay, but that does not mean we are not making in the Taliban's cabinet, of course, or anyway, and we are facing forced displacement, including in my hometown of Daikundi. Some 1,200 families were forcefully displaced, and yeah. So this is just a quick insight about the entire situation, and I'll be happy to be back. And sorry if I was over the time.
Thank you, Farkhunda. I do agree as well. I think it's important when we want to assess the reality of what's happening, that we compare and see if the words match the actions. And I thank you for drawing attention to international responsibility, because the Taliban themselves and the situation that's happening now would not happen if it was not facilitated, or there was some powers that allowed for it to happen. So it's very important that we do draw attention to the responsibility that each country that has had an involvement in Afghanistan. So thank you for that. I would also like to ask you one more thing. So from your particular field of experience, what is your call of action for the community? How best can allies support Afghan people?
Look, Naz, you and I speaking here tonight on a platform is a voice, and it is raising awareness. This is something that in the 1880s, in the Hazara genocide, that were a genocide by every definition that you could find. But nobody was there to talk about it. That technology, that connection, that diaspora sort of saturation was not there. So you and I speaking tonight, our audience, some 50 people listening tonight, this is great. We don't take this for granted, because thousands of Hazaras have been killed, but nobody heard about it. Why? Because nobody cared. We did not have that systematic connection to any of the international community or organization. And this was such a taboo to talk about the H word, to talk about Hazara. And here, for us to raise awareness, this is something we can do. I think the call of action for us as people, we're living in the 21st century, year 2021. Let's talk about it. Let's participate. If there are support grassroots organizations, people's voices, and there are many we could change about our government policies. Like right now, we have a very vibrant Afghan/Hazara diaspora community in Australia. They have been doing brilliant job in the last 3 months, raising awareness about the situation and everything else and what we can do. Let's participate. Let's not let the little that you could do means that an ethnic group could be saved, my family could be saved, I could be saved, these girls could go to school. There are stuff that we could do. It's not seeable, tangible, but they could make a big difference. So please, I would ask our audience tonight, participate in grassroots movements, support Afghan community, panels like tonight, and here I do not mean just to listen to us, but we will be. This is the first time that you're hearing from the pain that me and my people and our generation have been facing, because other people never listen to us. And just for you to listen to us tonight, I think this is a big thing, and I think it's a great start.
Thank you so much, Farkhunda, for that very poignant and very heart-touching talk. As a Hazara myself, as someone who had to flee Afghanistan, it pains me to see that the same girls that built an entire future on the basis of being able to become professionals one day and give back to the country are now fleeing, their credentials not being recognized in other countries. So it's as heartbreaking as it is. Like you said, we need to ensure that we are continuing the fight. Our next speaker is Sajjad Askary. Sajjad, you have done remarkable and tireless work for many, many years prior to even the 15th of August in the refugee space and in the Hazara advocacy space. You have done critical research on the state of Hazaras and the ongoing genocide under the Taliban regime and prior to that. Can you please tell us about the implications on the Hazara people in Afghanistan, as well as how this can impact the Hazaras in diaspora?
Sure. All right. Can you guys hear me? Nice, can you hear me? Okay, cool, that's cool. So hello,
Yes,
everyone, wherever you may be joining us around the world. So in my short talk, I would like to emphasize that Afghanistan is not safe for many under a Taliban rule, such as, human rights advocates, Afghans who work with foreign forces, women, children, religious minorities, but particularly the Hazara population of Afghanistan is explained by Farkhunda and Naz before me. I think the situation for Hazaras is particularly desperate. We may be aware that Hazaras are facing genocide in Afghanistan. While violence remains widespread across Afghanistan and the suffering of all people in Afghanistan is collective, with the return of the Taliban to power, I would like to highlight the three main reasons why Hazaras have been facing persecution and genocide in Afghanistan. So the three main reasons. Firstly, Hazaras have been targeted by virtue of their distinctive ethnic origins as a Hazara, as Hazaras have a Turco-Mongolian heritage, and our distinct Asiatic features have set us apart from other major ethnic groups in Afghanistan, such as Tajiks, Pashtuns, and Uzbeks. So we look more Mongolian, more Asiatic, have Asiatic features. So the Pashtun-centric Taliban's mantra, even during their rule in 1990s about Afghanistan non-Pashtun population went that, and I quote, Tajiks to Tajikistan, Uzbeks to Uzbekistan, and Hazaras to Goristan. Goristan is the Pashto word for cemetery. So these are the group in power today, a Pashtun-centric group. The second reason that we have been persecuted and that Hazaras have been facing genocide is our religion. So Hazaras have been facing exclusionary ideology and targeted on the basis of perceived religion, as Hazaras are predominantly Shia Muslims, while the majority of population in Afghanistan are Sunni Muslims. That said, Hazaras are not a homogeneous collective. There are Hazaras who are secular, Shia, atheist, Ismaili Hazaras, and Sunni Hazaras. So Hazaras have been despised by Sunni Muslim radicals and fundamentalists, such as the Pashtun-centric Taliban and the Islamic State group, and have been discriminated against, not just by these terrorist and fundamentalist groups, but also by Afghan institutions throughout the history, because of our religion and because of our identity. The third and last reason that we have been facing genocide in Afghanistan throughout the history is more recently is because of our relative success. So more recently, and particularly since 2001, when US and allied forces went into Afghanistan, Hazaras have been targeted over our hard-earned relative success in education, in sports and politics, and for our progressive and democratic ideas. So Hazara culture promotes, education, democratic values of social liberalism and progressive thinking in our community. And the community has embraced expanded educational opportunities. There are many, extraordinary examples of this in the Hazara diaspora community across the globe. I'm going to quote this sentence from Michael Sample, who was a former deputy to the European Union special representative for Afghanistan. He said, and I quote, "The Hazaras are producing the most enthusiastic, educated, forward-looking youth who are seizing the opportunities provided by the new situation. Yet, these young Hazara people in Afghanistan, just like me, just like Naz, are not being given opportunity or not any chance to participate in public life in Afghanistan. Rather, we have been killed and targeted." So all these cultural distinctions are at odds with the predominantly conservative religious views of wider Afghanistan society, and particularly with the Taliban and the militant groups like ISS. The Hazara success, strife, and liberation pose a threat to ethnocentric circles in Afghanistan. The return of the Taliban to power means that the group is seeking to reestablish, I guess, two things. Well, first, the Islamic Emirate state. They want Islamic rule, Islamic law based on a strict interpretation of Sharia law. But with that, the Taliban also want the instigation of Pashtun dominance in Afghanistan. The ongoing genocide that the Hazaras are facing should be a matter of international concern, and the International Human Rights Organization should act on this. We as Hazaras in the diaspora have tremendous fears for our people in Afghanistan, as the Hazara population have a dark history of genocide, of persecution and genocide by the Taliban, as demonstrated by their brutal treatment of the group and perpetration of massacres on the Hazaras during the 1990s, where Taliban killed thousands of people in just 3 days. Human Rights Watch reported that 3 Hazaras were killed, whereas the Hazara group estimate that more than 8,000 Hazaras were killed in 1990s by Taliban. The return of the Taliban is catastrophic for Afghanistan. It is very catastrophic. So now I want to talk about the Australia's involvement and the action for Afghanistan and the diaspora, the Hazara diaspora and the Afghan diaspora, what we have been doing here in Australia. Australia has invested and committed enormously to the development of Afghanistan, particularly in the area of education. Australia contributed to advancements in education and growth of civil society, and particularly to gain more rights for women and girls and religious minorities in Afghanistan. While Australia has withdrawn all its forces from the country, we as a long-time ally of the people of Afghanistan, I think we have a moral responsibility to assist and support Afghanistan during this difficult time. Australia has the influence, Australia has the capability, Australia has the resources and the moral responsibility to urgently help the people of Afghanistan in this time. Action for Afghanistan was born in mid-August with the fall of Kabul to Taliban. We, as the Afghanistan Australia Advocacy Network, who have come to Australia as refugees. So the network is made up of people from diverse ethnic and religious groups from Afghanistan. We have academics in this group. We have lawyers, health workers, advocates, community workers, tradespeople, educators, brothers, sisters, and family here. Our network has been doing a fantastic job in mobilizing people here in Australia. We have been lobbying with politicians, with the government, and working with other sectors of society to call for action for Afghanistan. So far, more than 150,000 people have signed a petition to the Australian government and to Australian government to support us in this campaign. So that's like more than 50,000 people. We have had support from businesses, from conservative Christian churches that never participated in this advocacy related issue to refugees here in Australia. We have hundreds of students from schools and universities across Australia who have been supporting our campaign and calling on Australian government to do something. So among the most important advocacy requests of the Australian government are three things. So firstly, in Australia, as we may be already aware, that we have over 5,100 refugees from Afghanistan who are on temporary visa, mainly Hazaras, who fled persecution. So these people have been living here in Australia for more than 8 years. Due to the nature of their visa, they are required to reapply every 3 or 5 years. These people have been living on temporary visa. The Australian government has not willing to provide permanent protection visa to these people, As a result of living on temporary visa, so living on temporary visa means living a life on limbo, living a life in uncertainty, not knowing what to do in your life. With temporary visa, you are not allowed to bring your family, to bring your wife and your children to Australia here. So, and this has been happening for more than 8 years, only from Hazara community, we have more than, many Hazara people who have committed suicide here in Australia in our community. One of them, I remember, who set himself on fire here in Dandenong. He set himself alive on fire. So that's how the situation is for the refugees here in Australia. Australian government is not listening to the plight of these refugees, is not doing anything for the last 8 years. And second, the Australian government needs to facilitate family reunification for these refugees. I mean, this can be done by allowing Afghan refugees who are living in Australia, who previously have been able to apply for partner or family visas from Afghanistan, to be able to do so now, considering the situation in Afghanistan. Because those Afghans, those families, and these people on the ground, they are at risk. They have family members here in Australia. So for this reason, we must raise the needs of Afghan refugees who have immediate family members in Afghanistan, such as partners and children, to have that window of opportunity open to them, so that they can apply for humanitarian and other visas to for their loved ones to be brought to safety here in Australia. The third and last point was that Australian government should provide must also provide protection to those in Afghanistan who are in urgent need of protection. Otherwise, as we know, they will face beatings, violations, killings at the hands of Taliban. The Australian government in 2015 created a special scheme for additional 12,000 humanitarian visas for Syrians. We Afghans, we the Hazara diaspora, we Australian Hazara, we believe that a similar scheme can be established for Afghans in urgent need of protection, particularly for the Hazara people in Afghanistan who are facing genocide. We have been shouting and screaming for the Australian government to please, help at least those communities on the ground who are facing genocide, like literally genocide in Afghanistan. So far, Australia has precedents. Australia has done it before. In the 7 years. In the 7 years following the fall of Saigon in Vietnam, Australia accepted about 60,000 Vietnamese refugees. That's 60,000 Vietnamese refugees. A proud legacy of Malcolm Fraser. What will Scott Morrison's legacy be after the fall of Kabul to Taliban? I mean, you know, our Prime Minister, he could begin today by helping the Afghan refugees here in Australia, if not on the ground in Afghanistan, by providing a permanent protection visa to this family, to these refugees, by establishing a scheme to bring their families from Afghanistan and to facilitate family reunification for these people. As of 15th November, the Australian government has received 32,000 applications for humanitarian protection visas from Afghanistan, meaning that roughly 150,000 people are waiting for a visa outcome. And furthermore, those people who were granted, emergency 3-month temporary visa, 449 visa, after 15th of August to enter Australia from Afghanistan. Now we have been hearing that this, that their visa has been expired, and these people, and the Australian government is not extending their visa. Instead they will require to apply for the 3,000 humanitarian visa. So the high volume of application received by the department highlights the need and the urgency for protection of Afghans. The Australian government needs to fast track this process to ensure those who are at risk of harm or persecution and genocide at the hands of Taliban, in particular the Hazaras. We think that the Hazara cases should be prioritized here in Australia under this scheme. And the international community, including Australia, must play its crucial role to protect the rights and survival of the Hazara population here in Afghanistan. The Australian public, the Australian people, must stand with the diaspora, with the Hazara diaspora from Afghanistan, and raise their voices to push for the Australian government to act immediately. As I said, Australia has a moral responsibility to help the most vulnerable, such as the Hazaras in Afghanistan. Thank you.
Thank you, Sajjad. I think a point you mentioned as well was that it's important not only for the Australian government, but for governments that are taking in people seeking refuge, that they do provide comprehensive help and something that can provide support not only for themselves, but for family, to reunite family as well. So thank you for that, Sajjad. Our next question is to Muzaffar. So Muzaffar, you continue to have an active involvement in aiding the disarmament of illegally armed groups, the strengthening of political institutions in Afghanistan. We would like to hear from you in regard to issues from the ground in Afghanistan, and particularly the suppression of independent journalists over there. Could you please speak to us about that?
Thank you very much, Dua. Thank you very much, our race, Dua and Nas, for organizing this forum. And thank you very much for Honda and Sajjad for your insight. That's really eye-opening detail, and I think very good for those who really want to know the issue. I would just say again that I would use Daikundi. It's one of the provinces, one of the 34 provinces in Afghanistan, as a case study to explain what's happening over there. And I use Daikundi because I worked in Daikundi for several years when I was working with the United Nations. And I have deep involvement and connection and attachment with this part of Afghanistan, where it shaped my imagination about real Afghanistan, real people of Afghanistan, how it looks like, and they're amazing. The experience that I got from those years are priceless and also always in my chest. Daikundi is a newly established province. It came into being in late 2004, Interestingly, out of 34 provinces, this was just the second province which has majority Hazara population, apart from Bamiyan. So when we talk about discrimination, one of the discrimination is systematic. And Hazara has historically been one of the major ethnicities in Afghanistan. I would say that Afghanistan is a country of minorities, and Hazaras is one of those minorities. And contrary to other ethnicities, Hazaras have just one province. So it means that they could have allocation of one governor, and in democratic system, they could have only 4 representatives out of, because each province had 4 National Assembly representative on national level in Kabul. So the Kundi was just second of this, which was considered as the biggest achievement by the Hazara advocates to go and talk with Karzai to have one more province. And I was really fortunate to be deployed there and work with those people. Strategically, Daikundi is an important province where it has borders with Oruzgan and Helmand, which was considered to be volatile provinces with a Taliban dominance, with Taliban influence. However, Hazaras of Daikundi province always resisted any kind of influence from the Taliban since past 20 years. Or after re-emergence in 2004 till 2021. So it was just not Daikundi that Hazaras resisted Taliban's influence, because historically Taliban persecuted Hazaras. They massacred in Bamiyan, Samangan, Saripul, Balkhau, and in Bamiyan provinces. So Hazaras had those memories in their mind, so they never collaborated with Taliban. They never paid them any ushur. They never let these Talibans to travel or pass from their villages. And sometimes Taliban were getting really frustrated because when they needed to go somewhere for operation against the government or international forces, they couldn't have any shortcuts or any kind of a safe passage from these villages. And always they issued letters to the Hazara villages in Gizab, in Daikundi, or in Bahran district. Gizab is part of Uruzgan, Daikundi as a whole, and Bahran district is part of Helmand province. So these Hazaras received regular threat letters from the Taliban in since past decades. So the Daikundi province fell under Taliban control on 14th of August. But when this domino effect started to happen, I tried to contact my contacts, my friends in the Daikundi province in July, what was happening and what is the situation in the Daikundi province. So interestingly, I would say that the Daikundi people are really nice. They were under illusion of the government protection till the last day, unfortunately. And whenever I talked to them, they said, oh yeah, everything is good. Government is here, we are supporting the government and we will resist. But on 14th of August, Taliban came like they sliced the whole security lines like a knife in the butter. There was no resistance. There was no any kind of protection for the people who protected the government for 20 years against the Taliban. All of a sudden, those people, those Hazaras who refused to collaborate with Taliban, they were at the mercy of Taliban people. I knew many of my friends who worked with the international forces as security guards, contractors. They were policemen. They worked with different organizations, with the United Nations. All of a sudden, they were at the mercy of the Taliban group. They were young, extremely uneducated. For example, they knew how to do a signature. They didn't know the local culture, the tradition. For example, the first thing they imposed on the people was to stop women coming out of their home. Hazara people, as Farhonda, as Sajjad mentioned, that we are progress-minded people. Our women are free to go get education. They are free to work. And our people live in mountainous region of Afghanistan where just men cannot work enough to survive. Women have to work. And in some areas, in some parts, women work more than men. They do whatever they can do, or whatever men do. So all of a sudden, this 50% of the population are stopped to come out of their home, get education, or go to work. And this situation created, it was kind of a suffocating the whole society. And on 19th of August, Taliban ordered displacement of those people who were living in critical villages. Critical villages, I mean, was that the Hazara villages, which were situated in two Pashtun villages, two Pashtun areas. And in past 15 years, they refused to let Taliban go from their village, to operate from their village. They refused to pay Taliban a tax, Islamic tax as ushur. They were sent an order of leaving their ancestral lands. They were given just 3 hours to leave their home. And particularly a valley, which is a very lush and beautiful place called Lorashiel, which was about 35 kilometers long. Thousands of people live there. So how come just 4 days, 5 days after Taliban control of Daikundi, and people should move? In Kindi district, people were forced to leave their homes, and they were all of a sudden they were displaced. And the next day, the Taliban sympathizers from Chora, Charchina, and Deraoud districts came and they occupied their land. And this happened just in few days. And hundreds of other people from Tsartagao village and other parts of Lorashiel, they were forced to displace. Considering the time of the season, where the winter season is coming, this is the time where people, they just work really hard to get ready for this period of time to survive. They stock food, firewood, and they make their wall winterproof. Because winter, when we talk about winter, it's not Australian winter. It's -10, -12, and it has heavy snowfall, and it needs a lot of preparation to get ready for this winter. So literally, my people, they work throughout the year to get ready for this time. And they are all of a sudden without any shelter, without any home. And we have to bear in mind that there would be when WFP is calling about humanitarian crisis, just imagine being without home and displaced in these villages, remote villages where women and children are without any shelter, without any food, and they're at the mercy of Taliban in winter. So there will be definitely a big crisis of humanitarian issue in these areas. There were a lot of reports of killings and torture. For example, on 13th of August, Taliban disarmed 13 Afghan National Security Forces personnel, and they were taken to Creek, and they were massacred. The way it was massacred in Bamiyan, it reminded me the Bamiyan massacre when I was interviewing the villagers. The way the villagers were herded, they were chained, they were herded into Creek, and they were killed. That was just a kind of a similar replication of their past crimes since 2002. Arbitrary detentions and arrest is widespread in remote villages. People get arrested, they're tortured severely for two purposes: to get information or to get weapons from them. The information they get under this torture, they arrest other people. The purpose of arrest is to punish those people who worked with the government, or those who fought against the Taliban during during the democratic regime, democratic government. I think when we talk about the international obligations, when we talk about why Australia would go and support the Afghan people or Hazaras, I would say that just consider Gizab district, who always refused to give a safe passage to the Taliban in Uruzgan. They never let Taliban to use their villages, their strategic areas to launch any attack against international forces. Alternatively, in contrast, they were shoulder to shoulder to fight against extremism for their freedom, in their front bases, in their front lines. I think we should also acknowledge those fallen soldiers, 43 soldiers in Uruzgan. But Hazaras have also paid more than this number. When we talk about genocide, we see the way Taliban behave with Hazaras is so general. Like, they complain about one person to collaborate with the international forces, but the punishment is for the whole village. Punishment doesn't see women, doesn't see any children, but they punish everyone. It comes with displacement. It comes, as Farhonda said, massacre in the hospital or the students, and we pay the price. And what's now happening at this moment? I would just like to draw your attention about the incidents that happened in Gizab and Daikundi. So I think Sajjad mentioned really well about the thrive for education of Hazara people in Afghanistan. I think they made the real modern face of Afghan youth, which is predominantly, Afghanistan is predominantly a youth nation. They are tech savvy, they have social media. So as soon as the Taliban came, they started repeating their history, persecuting, torturing, and killing people. But they encountered the new generation of Hazaras with the technology, with the access of information to the wider world. They made reports, the videos, they contacted the journalists, they showed the videos and images to the wider communities, to the journalists, and it get a lot of attraction on national and international media. The diaspora communities in Australia, Europe, and America, they just exposed the Taliban crimes as much as they could. And it created a momentum that the Taliban had to stop displacement, even though temporarily. For example, Taliban issued a decree that the displacement should be stopped. We will do a proper investigation of these issues. However, they denied on international media, on international level, that there haven't been any displacement. There haven't been any killings. But the governor was changed in the Kundi. The behavior was significantly changed. I think this, I would just go back to the notion of storytelling and story keeper, as Doug mentioned at the beginning, is that we are the storytellers. We are the people who hold the stories. We have the connections on the ground, what's happening. And what I would also suggest that being part of the story is miserable. It's all about suffering. It's all about seeing the persecution, and sometimes we feel ourselves powerless. But telling the story gives that power to really the change, really for the change. I think what we see in Taliban, there is very, very little hope. I think 99%, I would say, is depression. That's why I don't use social media a lot, because the images or the news that I see is so heartbreaking. It breaks, but I focus on different things that what I can do to be part of solution, to be part of the team that could do something that could create change. I think today's conversation with esteemed and distinguished speakers, Farhonda and Sajjad, is focused to come up for that solution. I think what I'm not going to specifically name and tell the location of where this fund that we are asking now will be spent online, because this is online, this will be recorded, and this will be shared probably on YouTube or social media. I'm not going to tell the names, but I'm really happy to give you more details in person. What are those hidden heroes? They prevented more displacement. They prevented or played their role to stop more possibilities of genocide by the Taliban, or saving people through their storytelling. I'm in contact with them, and this fundraising that we are doing today and the upcoming days for next 3 weeks is to strengthen that institutionally. We are not entering in this situation as a cowboy to have the ability to solve everything, but we can enable and strengthen the institution to tell their own stories, to be able to tell their own stories. The fund you gave will bring more stories from the ground level, and that will put more pressure on Taliban to prevent any further displacement and possibilities of genocide. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Muzaffar, for that very insightful talk. I know the important work that you've been doing over the last few months to ensure that those voices are broadcasted to the world, because one thing that the Taliban are working hard towards is to ensure that Afghanistan's youth and Afghanistan's minorities' voices are shunned and that the world does not hear from them. So the work that you're doing as a young person, it's unbelievable. And I thank you for that. I just wanted to flag that now it's the segment of our Q&A. So if you have any questions for our panelists, please put them in the chat. I know that there was a question from Jasmine regarding LGBTQ plus Afghans in Afghanistan. I should note that I personally myself am not part of that community, so I don't want to be speaking on behalf of them. But if any of the speakers who have done research in that field, please feel free to comment on that. If not, I do want to raise that question just in case if we have anyone in the audience who have any insight. Farkhunda or Sajjad or Muzaffar, have you done any research on the state of people who are LGBTQ or identify as such? Farkhunda?
I haven't done any research on the LGBTI community, but I have been following the trend that there are a community. I mean, we do know we are a traditional community. It's very difficult for them to identify themselves as such publicly. But now coming back to the Taliban regime, I mean, here we're talking about a woman, I mean, established just a different gender to men. They're finding difficult to be who they are, and let alone for this very minority genders in Afghanistan to identify themselves, and anyone who know about them, what a great risk it is for them. I'm aware that there are a very small community from them in Europe, maybe in Australia, but here, whatever gender, they can't recognize themselves. So that just shows that if we don't have a voice from the LGBTI community from Afghanistan, that just means that they're vulnerable, they are dismissed, they are facing different layers of discrimination that they cannot come out and speak about their identity.
Thank you, Farkhunda. Like you said, it's incredibly volatile for members of the LGBTQ community, just being themselves, coming out in a world where, in a country where minorities, another gender, women are discriminated against. We could imagine how difficult and how dangerous it would be for them to live their whole selves and to be free of discrimination for loving who they love, for being who they are. So hopefully in the near future we could maybe hold a panel in regards to this, but at the moment I do not want to speak on their behalf. Did we have any other questions? Or Sajjad, did you want to, I saw that you unmuted yourself. Did you want to speak on this?
No, thank you for that question. I don't have any particular thing to add on that, but I just wanted to make one comment. I think, yeah, we have that community in Afghanistan, LGBTIQ+. I think they should be helped. I think the international community, including Australia, should consider helping them. You know, I mean, as mentioned before, that we have women who have been facing discrimination. But then, you know, people like LGBTI and Hazaras, there is a lot of chances for Hazaras and for LGBTI group that Taliban may eliminate them, may kill all of them, but Taliban may not kill all women. Women will be discriminated, their rights will be abused by Taliban, but groups like LGBTI could be killed, all of them, by Taliban. So I think the international community should take this very seriously to provide them protection.
Yeah. Thank you, Sajjad. You raise a very, very important point in regards to how severely detrimental being part of an LGBTI community in Afghanistan is under the Taliban rule. We need to, like you said, do more, act more, and be stronger allies for people to ensure that they are not eliminated, so that they can live their life free of discrimination and free of the fear of death. We've got 10 more minutes, so feel free to add any more questions in the chat. Husna has added, is there any more information on the situation of people with disabilities in Afghanistan currently living under the Taliban? Does anyone want to tackle this question? That's a fantastic question, especially because I personally haven't seen a lot of information out of the country. Does anyone want to Farkhunda?
That's again another very vulnerable question. People with disabilities are vulnerable everywhere, but a lot more vulnerable in Afghanistan because they're considered as subhumans. I mean, that standard exists there, let's see, in the social structure, in the healthcare, does not recognize them, does not feel the need that we need to address them like we do everywhere else. Here, they are the most invisible creators or people in that social structure, and I'm ashamed that I haven't seen them, and I haven't personally volunteered to any organization, any places or any platform that I could help those. But I do know Afghanistan has been at war for some 43 years. We have so many disabled people physically and mentally, and these people are not addressed. These people are invisible. They are reduced to almost nothing because anyone upper than them who are considered, because they're not there, they're struggling. That vulnerability is not addressed by the state, any of those international organizations, let alone that now we are talking about a country and it's such a big, massive humanitarian crisis that we could address vulnerable groups or subgroups that are in need of special attention. And this is the area I think the diaspora, the Afghan diaspora, youth like Naz, I, Sajjad, many other could work on, as well as our Australian colleagues. That could focus, if we want to look for a case study or for a group that we could help, let's look at Afghanistan. There are people who are experiencing traumas, disability from mines, from physical or mental disabilities, and what can we do for them? Because as I said earlier, the situation in Afghanistan is international. We all have a responsibility and have a say. It is not on the spotlight because nobody wanted to be on the spotlight, but we can bring it on and we can do something. We have many students here that could help people in Afghanistan in every sector, in the women's sector, in the health sector, in the different aspects of the disability sector, that they could contribute. And here my hope is not so much on the government, because government policies is politics. It's about what we could do. Afghanistan is far away, I understand, but we have a very vibrant Afghan community in Australia. My heart will always be broken. Naz's heart will always be broken if Afghanistan is sad, it's teary, it's blooded. So if we could all work together to support any aspect and advocate for that, Afghanistan is always worthy of an experience, and I'm sure it will not disappoint you. It will give you or return that favor that you give to Afghanistan.
Thank you, Muzaffar. Go ahead.
I will just add to Farhonda's comments. I think that was really, really good. But since I was working with the government, the Afghanistan government had a dedicated ministry for the families of martyred and disabled people. So as I think we all know that the Afghanistan was kind of a proxy war ground of the liberal world and the communism during the Cold War. And millions of Afghans were killed, injured, and consequently a lot of people got disabled because there were a lot of mines, and some of them got disabled due to the conflict, armed conflicts. So the mandate of this ministry was to support these disabled people and to support the family of those who lost their loved ones during jihad. But you know, Afghanistan is a country which rose from the ashes of war, and again it went into that fire of war. So the notion of support for disabled people is quite different in Afghanistan. The way people of Afghanistan approach disability, or the way the government can support disabled people, is quite different the way in Western countries provide support to the disabled individuals or abled individuals. But I would just agree that the support would mostly come as very little amount of cash that could help their livelihood or provide some basic food. And apart from that, the reintegration of the disabled people is almost to very little. And mentally disabled people is, I think there is very little opportunity for diagnostics, very little opportunities for any treatment for them. So yeah, the situation for disabled people, the situation for LGBTIQ group of people, I think that needs big attention in future. And we cannot expect from Taliban that could support, even they cannot feed their own soldiers.
Thank you very much, Muzaffar. Thank you to all our speakers. To wrap up, we would like to once again thank the speakers for joining us this evening, and to you all for making it to this panel. We hope you enjoyed this discussion, and we wish to see you again at our future events. If you would like to stay updated on our future events and projects, or simply get in contact, we've put the social media handles and links in the chat, so please check those out, and please donate if you can. Thank you and good night.
Before